Good morning, everyone. My name is Dheeraj Kumar Yadav, and I am from 5D BSc DS. My cloud computing CAT1 project is titled Deployment of WordPress in Cloud Computing using Microsoft Azure. In this project, I deployed a functional WordPress website on a Microsoft Azure by integrating an Azure Virtual Machine with Azure Database for MySQL Flexible Server. The main objective of this project was to deploy a fully functional WordPress website on a Microsoft Azure using two different cloud services. I used an Azure Virtual Machine as a compute service to host the WordPress, Apache PHP, and I used Azure Database for MySQL Flexible Server as the managed database servers. I also configured the connectivity between these two services and made the WordPress website publicly accessible through the VM virtual machines public IPs address. So the main goal was not just to install the WordPress but to demonstrate how different Azure cloud services can work together to host a complete web application. For this project, I used two main Azure services. The first, Azure Virtual Machine, which acted as the compute layer. I connected to the virtual machine using SSH and installed the configured and required web environment including Apache PHP and WordPress. The second service was Azure Database for MySQL web, flexible web service. This was used as the backend database for WordPress where the website's data is stored. Therefore, the virtual machine handled the application and the web service side, while the MySQL flexible server handled the database. The slide shows the overall architecture of my deployment. First, the user accesses the WordPress through the website uh, on a website through a browser. The request reaches the public IP address of my Azure virtual machine. The virtual machine runs the web servers and PHPs, which then runs the WordPress application. Whenever the WordPress needs to restore or retrieve information, it communicates with the Azure database for MySQL servers. So basically, the virtual machine hosts the WordPress and MySQL flexible server stores its data. The public IP provides access to the application. I first configured the database side of the project using Azure Database for MySQL flexible server. I created the managed MySQL server and configured its compute, storage, and network settings. I also configured the required network rules so that the virtual machine could communicate with the database. After that, I use that using Cloud Shell. I connected to MySQL server and created a database called WordPress. Also created the delegated database user for WordPress and used credentials to establish the connection between WordPress and the MySQL server. The screenshots on the sides show both Azure database configuration and the successful creation of the WordPress database through MySQL. After setting up the database, I configured the Azure Virtual Machine, which was the compute component of the project. I created the virtual machine inside the dedicated resource group and connected it to the SSH. Inside the virtual machine, I configured the required web environment, including the Apache web service, PHP, and WordPress files. The virtual machine assigned a public IP address which allowed me to access the WordPress website from a browser. The screenshot here shows the virtual machine deployment process and SSH connection configuration. Once the web servers and the database were ready, I started the WordPress installation through the browser. First, I selected the language and proceeded to the WordPress configuration screen. WordPress then required the database communication details. including the database name, username, password, and database host. I entered the details of the Azure MySQL flexible server instead of using the local database. And after this, submitting the configuration, WordPress successfully connecting to the Microsoft SQL database completed the installation and allowed me to access the WordPress administration dashboard. This is an important point to emphasize. The important parts here is the WordPress was not using the database installed locally on the virtual machine. It was communicating with the separate Azure managed SQL service. This slide demonstrates the final working deployment. After completing the installation and configuration, I was able to access the WordPress dashboard successfully. I also verified the WordPress was connecting and deployed MySQL servers and created and published a new page through the WordPress. This confirmed that the application was not only installed but was also actually functioning correctly. With the Azure backend database, if you are doing a live demo, say now I can demonstrate and deploy the website and show that I can log into it, access the dashboards and create a publishable content. For the networking and the security configurations, uh, I configured and the required ports and database access. Port 80 was enabled so that the users could access the WordPress website through HTTP. Port 22 was used for SSH, which allowed me to securely connect to the connect and manage the virtual machine during configuration. On the database side, I configured the required networking rules so that the database could be accessed by necessary connections. WordPress also connected the MySQL using specific database credentials rather than relying on completely open database access. Therefore, the configuration focused on allowing only connectively required for the deployment. To conclude, I successfully deployed a WordPress application on Microsoft Azure by integrating the virtual machine and Azure database for MySQL flexible server. During the process, I configured the web app service, PHP, and WordPress database, networking, and firewall settings. I also encountered a database connectivity issue that during the installation, I diagnosed the problem by testing the MySQL connection directly from the virtual machine and then connected the database. Overall, this project helped me understand how compute, database, networking, and application services can be integrated together in cloud environment. Thank you very much.